Mass protests against Trump's immigration enforcement have been taking place across the country for weeks. But my next guest has a proposal for a way to send a message that the president cannot ignore: a big tech boycott. Scott Galloway writes, "We must recognize that he is unfazed by citizen outrage, the courts, or the media. He responds to one thing: the market." Scott Galloway, marketing professor at NYU Stern School of Business, joins me now. He is also a New York Times bestselling author and co-host of the Raging Moderates podcast and Prof G Markets podcast, and of course, Pivot. Okay, Scott, my dear friend, first I would say I agree with you that if Donald has one daddy, it's the bond market. But could you just give some credit? When you say citizen outrage, look at how extraordinary the people of Minneapolis have been. Far braver and bolder than any CEO in this country. And we're seeing the president somewhat take notice.
Yeah, I want to be clear. Political parties don't foment change. People do. And the protests are inspiring. And I think it's just healthy to do something like this with other people. I think it's an additive or a cumulative effect, not an either or. So in a way, I think of honoring the good people who give up their Saturday, and quite frankly, sometimes they're putting themselves in physical harm's way and giving up time with their family to protest, is to say, well, shouldn't I, at a minimum, maybe go from 2 LLMs to 1, from 6 streaming platforms to 1, take the tube or the subway a little bit more and cancel my ride hailing? Do I really need to be a subscriber to Amazon Prime through February? So I see this as—
But just break that down. Like walk us through this concept, because until now, or at least in Trump 2.0, CEOs seem to be happy, right? They get what they want out of the White House. The markets aren't punishing them, so they're burying their heads in the sand.
Yeah, so let's talk numbers. The S&P, 40% of the S&P is now a small number of companies, big tech, that are largely subscription-based. If you really want to hurt or send a message to the president, he listens to markets, as you referenced. So how do you do that? Have to go after the soft issue. If you cancel, say you have Anthropic and ChatGPT, and you decide to cancel ChatGPT, $20 a month, $240. OpenAI is raising money at an $800 billion market cap, $20 billion revenues. That's 40 times revenues. So your $240 less of subscription revenues translates to approximately $10,000 in market capitalization. The easiest way to send a strong signal to the markets and to the president is to go after the most fully valued companies whose CEOs have his ear and have enabled him. So if you want to have the maximum impact on your effort, and I'm not suggesting that protests or staying home from work aren't really powerful, but the easiest thing for people around America to do to have a real impact is to decide, do they need 2 LLMs? Do they need 6 streaming platforms? And it's a small price to pay and a nod to the good people in Minneapolis to say, as long as there are people, a secret police with masks on, I can do with fewer recurring revenue subscription programs. And the markets will feel this, and the president will feel this. So I'm talking about— I've struggled my whole life, Stephanie, with the difference between being right and being effective. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how we could send a message to the markets and the president that what is going on here is a total attack on American values. And I think the string we can pull here is to go after the subscription revenues of big tech that now represents 40% of the S&P.
I want to ask you about another message that I think went out to the American people, I think loud and clear, yesterday. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made a personal visit to the Blue Origin headquarters and was greeted by none other than its founder, Jeff Bezos. This is days after Amazon paid $40 million for the rights to Melania. She was paid tens of millions of dollars. They spent tens of millions of dollars marketing this film. Is this the access Bezos is paying for? Because Blue Origin is his big business that loses huge amounts of money and could certainly benefit from government contracts.
This is pure grift, and I want to create an analogy, a dark one. In early 30s Germany, a lot of the titans of the manufacturing industry in Germany essentially said to Hitler, if you crush the unions and make us more profitable, we'll ignore this slow burn to fascism. And then when it kind of got out of control, it was too late. And I see the same thing here. Notice how these big tech companies are not subject to tariffs, that Apple was somehow able to get out of these tariffs. We're even talking now about some sort of bill that might back, with the full faith of the U.S. government, some of these huge infrastructure investments. When Tim Cook goes to the premiere with an inscribed hard disk drive, when Amazon overpays for the Melania documentary, this is pure pay for play. When when the Ellison family says to Warner shareholders, you should accept our bid because it's more likely to go through because I'm a Republican donor and have my head so far up the orifice of the president you can't see my legs. That is an admission by these individuals that they now recognize the government is pay for play. And you've probably heard from them, and so have I, via text message, that they hate themselves. I'm like, well, I hate you too. And until you speak out, this autocracy, kleptocracy that is enabling a slow burn to fascism from the people that he cares about and then the markets care about, they need to speak out. Enough is enough. This is leading us to a very dark place. And what I'm suggesting is an economy that is 70% consumer driven, that our hidden weapon that's been hiding in plain sight is our consumer spending. And if you want the biggest bang for the buck, go after big tech subscription services. It is not a huge price to pay, and it will have a big impact.
And let me be clear, Scott, I've heard from all of them, and it is absolute BS. Because if they want to get paid the big bucks and if they want to be on the big stage, then they have to do the right thing when it counts. You just wrote, your last book was all about masculinity, and I've been thinking about you. I thought about you when I watched what happened to Renee Good. I thought about it with Alex Preddy. Your take on this version of masculinity that these ICE agents are portraying as they intimidate regular people, like brave mothers holding up cell phones in the face of armed ICE agents covered in masks.
This is what I really don't understand, Stephanie. I don't understand. The whole point of masculinity is you demonstrate skills and strength such that you can acquire influence and power. And then you move to the second leg of the stool of masculinity, and that is the whole shooting match is such that you can protect others. And for the life of me, I can't understand what the point is of aggregating the wealth of a small nation state if you don't immediately move to protection. What does it mean to be, why would you want to be the wealthiest man in the world when you're cutting off aid to HIV positive mothers? Why would you want to be the third wealthiest man in the world when you enable this type of depravity? Why would you want to be the CEO of the most valuable company in the world when you see that a lot of the rights and rule of law that helped you get to this point are directly under attack? I am literally befuddled. What is the point of acquiring all this strength if you're not going to move immediately to protecting other people, or at a minimum, nod to the principles, the rule of law, the anti-corruption laws that have made you a billionaire to begin with? It's literally pulling the ladder up behind you and setting it on fire. So I don't think
what's the point? What is the point of being one of the richest men in the world when, in order for you to party and meet chicks, you need to be entertaining a man who is convicted of soliciting sex from a minor? But welcome to the United States in 2026. My last question before we go. Common Sense Media released a report ahead of the Super Bowl showing that more than a third of boys are now gambling before the age of 18. And of course, it is fueled by sports betting, social media, and video games. You and I have been talking about this since the early days of COVID, when boys were in their houses, in their mom's basements, online. How concerned are you?
The most profitable companies in the world are all trying to do one thing, and that is convince young men that can have a reasonable facsimile of life on a screen with an algorithm. Why have friends when you have Reddit and Discord? Why engage in play or take risks in sports when you can gamble on the speed of the pitch? Why would you approach a stranger and express romantic interest when you have lifelike porn? We are literally developing a new species of asocial, asexual males, which has been tied to the profits of the S&P. These firms are not on our side. And what I would say to any young man or any young person is nothing wonderful will happen to you on a screen. You need to get out, in my view, be around other people, maybe even drink more, and I've gotten some pushback on that, and make a series of bad decisions that might pay off. Nothing wonderful is going to happen to you at home and on a screen.
What you are about to hear are stories of life in Donald Trump's America, and you will hear stories about death in Donald Trump's America when you hear the testimony today from Renee Good's brothers, who talked about the light she brought into this world before she was murdered by ICE agent Jonathan Ross, who was put on that street by Donald Trump. If on a Saturday morning you are on your way to church to donate some clothes, as Miramar Martinez was, this is what can happen to you now in Donald Trump's America.
The Border Patrol vehicle stopped just 1 to 2 car lengths ahead of me. It seemed like time stopped. I knew from watching the news coverage of other Border Patrol encounters in Chicago that I was in danger. I watched the vehicle of Border Patrol agent killing Silverio Villegas Gonzalez just 3 weeks prior. I knew I had to get to safety before I was dragged from my car and likely beaten or killed. I drove forward and went around the Border Patrol agents, who jumped out of his car and pointed his gun at me. I moved to the far left lane, striking the curb on the far left side of Ketsi. The next thing I knew, I felt a burning sensation in my arms, legs, and that I had been shot by pepper balls, which I also see these agents fire at people in our community. As I continued to drive past the Border Patrol agents, I could hear my back passenger window shatter, and I felt bullets continue to pierce my body. As I attempted to drive to a safe location, I began to feel lightheaded. I looked down and I noticed blood gushing out of my arms and legs, and I realized I'd been shot multiple times. As I became lightheaded, I became worried I would pass out and endanger other drivers on the road. I managed to drive a mile from where the incident happened, and I pulled into a parking lot of a mechanic shop, and I called 911. I told the 911 operator that Border Patrol agents had just shot me and I needed help. I recall some of the workers from the shop sitting me down in a chair as I was waiting for help, but I was losing this battle. I saw my life flash before me and slowly began to think this was the end for me. And before losing consciousness, the next thing I remember is the EMT putting me on a stretcher, taking me to the hospital. At the hospital, I remember seeing multiple agents standing around, watching me be treated for my wounds. My arms, legs, and chest were all wrapped in bandages. I had 7 bullet holes in my body. I remember the agents rushing the nurses to finish up so they could take me with them. I still felt dizzy. I was not able to fully process what had happened to me. After being at the hospital for less than 3 hours, I was discharged from the hospital and took custody of the FBI.
That could be you. That could be your sister. That could be your mother. That could be anyone now in Donald Trump's America. She was hit by 5 bullets, creating 7 gunshot wounds because some of the bullets had created exit wounds before re-entering the body, possibly passing through her arm and then into her chest. That's how you get more wounds than the number of bullets fired. And that agent is very proud that his bullets did that kind of damage. She was still bleeding after those 3 hours in the emergency room, and Donald Trump's agents dragged her out of that hospital and put her in jail that Saturday night to spend the weekend in jail. I was in a car accident once where I broke some bones, and I was in the hospital for 12 days, and I didn't have a single bullet wound. When Donald Trump's agents try to kill you, they really try to kill you. And if they don't kill you on the street, they will try to kill you by dragging you out of the hospital if they can. And that is not a mistake. Dragging a wounded young woman out of the hospital, that is a willful attempt to kill her. But Miramar Martinez is a miracle because Miramar Martinez just wouldn't die.
The news in the jail that evening had my story and was being called a domestic terrorist. They said I quote-unquote rammed federal agents. I was in shock. If they only knew I was a month away from paying off my truck and I would never intentionally damage my vehicle, much less be crazy enough to hit a law enforcement. On Friday, I was teaching the young children at the Montessori school, and we were singing and dancing and getting ready for spooky season, preparing fall activities to do the following week. And on Saturday, my own government was calling me a domestic terrorist. And I was in federal detention centers with the bullet holes all over my body.
And then in court on the next Monday morning, Donald Trump's prosecutors wanted to keep Miramar Martinez in jail awaiting trial, in jail indefinitely. The judge saw a courtroom full of parents from the school where she's a teacher and her family there supporting her. And the judge listened to the evidence and he immediately released her. And then Agent Charles Exum drove the car that he jumped out of that day from Chicago to Maine. That's right. He willfully removed the important evidence in the case, the vehicle which he claims Miramar Martinez tried to ram. And he drove that car across the country to get it out of the case. There must have been absolutely no damage on that car. There must have been no evidence on that car that could possibly have helped their case. And then Donald Trump's invasion force and Donald Trump's federal prosecutors just dropped the charges against Miramar Martinez and thereby proved that they were lying, that she never tried to ram their car, because they never would have dropped the charges for that. They proved by dropping those charges there was absolutely no reason to fire a single shot at her. The 30-year-old Montessori school teacher, who Donald Trump's liars called a domestic terrorist, was never charged with a crime. They tried to murder her, but never charged her with a crime. Who are the domestic terrorists in that story? None of the victims of the Trump-encouraged violence testifying in today's hearing were ever charged with a crime. The next victim, another American citizen, was from Minneapolis.
My name is Aliyah Rahman, and I'm a resident of South Minneapolis. I'm a Bangladeshi American, born in northern Wisconsin, and I'm a disabled person with autism and a traumatic brain injury. Not all autistic brains do this, but mine fixates on sounds, numbers, and patterns. On January 13th, on the way to my 39th appointment at Hennepin County's Traumatic Brain Injury Center, I encountered a traffic jam caused by ICE vehicles and no signs indicating how to get around it. I had not wanted to pull into a blocked, chaotic intersection, but verbally agreed to do so and rolled down my window after an agent yelled, "Move, I will break your effing window." His first instruction. Agents on all sides of my vehicle yelled conflicting threats and instructions that I could not process while watching for pedestrians. Then the glass of the passenger side window flew across my face. I yelled, "I'm disabled," at the hands grabbing at me, and an agent said, "Too late." I felt immersed in a pattern, and I thought of Genoa Donald, an autistic black man killed by police during a traffic stop in 2021. I remembered Mr. Silverio Villegas Gonzalez, who was killed by ICE in his vehicle last year. An agent pulled a large combat knife in front of my face, which I thought was for cutting me, and later learned was used to cut off my seatbelt. Shooting pain went through my head, neck, and wrists when I hit the ground face first, and people leaned on my back. I felt the pattern, and I thought of Mr. George Floyd, who was killed 4 blocks away. I was carried face down through the street by my cuffed arms and legs while yelling that I had a brain injury and was disabled. I now cannot lift my arms normally. I was never asked for ID, never told I was under arrest, never read my rights, and never charged with a crime.
Antonio Romanucci, an attorney for Renee Good's family, testified to the joint House-Senate hearing today where not a single Republican showed up to offer one word of defense for the crimes committed by Donald Trump's invasion forces against American citizens in American cities.
The United States legal system allows for individuals to pursue civil justice with the suit against a city, county, or state for the conduct of its officers and against the officers individually. These types of legal claims are made under what is called 42 U.S. Code Section 1983. This was part of the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1871 and is essential for accountability when an officer behaves unconstitutionally. Keep in mind that this act is 155 years old and desperately needs an amendment. However, similar legal action against federal law enforcement officers like ICE or Border Patrol is not currently allowed under Section 1983. There is a current possible path of civil recovery through the Federal Tort Claims Act, or FTCA, but this is challenging. It requires first the filing of a claim with a government agency that has harmed you, and then waiting up to 6 months for a reply. Our current paradox is that America should not require the permission of the federal government to sue the federal government for cases like Renee Good or Alex Preddy. If the government must give you permission to seek accountability for violation of constitutional rights, then your rights are just words on paper. There is a legislative remedy to this paradox. At the state level, Minnesota and other states can pass bills making it a state law to violate constitutional rights. In Illinois, we did this by signing House Bill 1312. Congress can remove this roadblock to federal accountability by amending Section 1983 and adding 4 words, as you, Senator Blumenthal, pointed out, so federal officers can be sued civilly if their conduct merits it. The current language spells out that state, county, and municipal law enforcement can be sued, and Congress would only need to add the words "or the United States" to the list of governments whose officers could be brought to civil justice. It's that simple. I'm urging you to consider this amendment and fix a 155-year-old problem.
Leading off our discussion tonight, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He's the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. He will be chairman of the Judiciary Committee if the Democrats win the House of Representatives. Congressman Raskin, that proposed change in law would come to your committee. What is your assessment of that proposal?
Well, Lawrence, we've been fighting for this for the last several Congresses with my colleague Hank Johnson from Georgia. We have introduced legislation to create a federal Bivens action because the Supreme Court had originally allowed this. It's been successively undermined by subsequent decisions. So we could amend Section 1983 to sweep in federal officers. We could also amend the Federal Tort Claims Act so people could actually sue the government for damages. And we believe it's essential to solidify the social contract. The scenes that you just showed us are so gruesome and so demoralizing because what you see is a government at war with its own people. And the whole point of the social contract is that we will be safer entering into civil society together. That's what John Locke said. That's what Rousseau said. That's what Hobbes said. Than we would be if we stayed in a state of nature where it's just everybody fighting for themselves. Well, they're giving us a situation where we are no longer safer inside civil society. They've turned the social contract into a war of the government against the people. And so we have to restore the social contract. That's what we can do once we take back the Congress. But we are depending on people all over the country to stay in this fight. The heroic resistance that we've seen in Minneapolis is a model for what's got to take place all over America and in the upcoming No Kings rally. I was rereading the old Václav Havel essay that he wrote in 1978 called The Power of the Powerless, basically saying when you're up against an authoritarian regime, everybody's got to decide, are you going to live within the lie or are you going to step outside of the lie and live inside the truth? And I thought about that because I saw a sign at one of the rallies in Minneapolis which said, "We have eyes, stop the lies." And I think that's where America is right now.
So Congressman Garcia had a moment in the hearing where he said, I just want to remind people that Kristi Noem won't be secretary forever. Donald Trump won't be president forever. Suggesting that 3 years from now we could have a Democratic president, we could have a new attorney general. That Justice Department would be empowered to do real criminal investigations of these shootings, of these beatings, and of these arrests. And so those agents may all get a federal pardon from Donald Trump so that the federal government won't be able to do that in the next administration. But without that pardon, this remains an open possibility for the next Justice Department to investigate, doesn't it?
Of course. Well, we're going to have real attorney generals again. People like Robert F. Kennedy, people like Edward Levy, people like Janet Reno. We are going to have a real Justice Department again. We are going to have a real criminal division again that brings criminal actions against government officials who violate the civil rights of the people. We are going to restore and we're going to fortify and improve the rule of law. And we know it's not as simple as just turning the clock back to the time before Donald Trump, because obviously those were the conditions that allowed for Donald Trump and MAGA to penetrate our society and take over our government. We're going to have to fortify democracy and freedom to make them much stronger going forward. And having been through this nightmare together and with the heroic resistance and opposition that we're seeing all over the country, we're going to make it through. We need to obviously mobilize the vote and keep winning the way we won in Virginia, in New Jersey, in California, in Alabama, the way we just won in Texas, a 31-point swing in a state Senate election. We're going to keep going, and we have to defend those elections because Donald Trump, who obviously has no other program for America relating to health care, relating to housing for young people, relating to any public good, has one objective in mind, which is trying to steal the election the way he tried to steal it back in 2020 when he called the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, in Georgia and said, I just want you to find me 11,780 votes. That wasn't Donald Trump trying to stop election fraud. That was Donald Trump trying to commit election fraud. And he did it all over the country, and he will try again. But we are ready for him, and we have people fighting all over America to defend the democratic institutions that we've got.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Fact number one, Republicans fear that Donald Trump's obviously widely unpopular second term is dragging them down towards what could be a midterm loss or full-blown rout. Fact number two, President Trump's administration is now blatantly pushing these abuses of power, some of them unconstitutional, to change that trajectory, not by actually winning more votes, which is what everyone's encouraged to do in a democracy that uses the rule of law, but no, to change it through pressure, through government force, through possibly illegal prosecutions of their perceived foes, not by offering a popular agenda to win more votes. And it is that very clear contrast between where our democracy could be headed, and no one knows what will happen in the midterms. I'm just telling you what even the Republican Party chair said, that they're bracing for a loss. That's what's happening in our actual lived democracy and the indicators we have, plus Republican losses in November. And then these efforts, some of them possibly on the line, possibly just sort of pushing and squeezing and testing, and some of them, as we've told you, because we'll always keep it real and factual with you, some of them obviously flatly unconstitutional on the other lane. We're talking about attacks on U.S. guardrails from elections to free speech, including what we have here tonight. This is the first time we're seeing, through new body cam video, what was clearly a troubled and chaotic scene as Donald Trump's FBI agents went to seize ballots in Georgia. We have the video from reporting by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The FBI approached in a way that clearly left the local officials concerned about not only the unusual federal raid for old ballots from a long-resolved race, but also whether this legally required Trump FBI warrant was even valid.
So did anybody get a physical copy of the search warrant?
No.
When did they get here?
About 12:30.
Just unannounced?
Unannounced.
Then the FBI, represented through these agents we have in the video, they seem to admit the warrant was at least off. I say that broadly because, again, we're working off the video. We don't have all the materials. But it was off enough that it required, they admitted, amending to even be valid.
The warrant will be amended slightly, but for all intents and purposes, what they had is what it's going to look like. We wanted to let her facilitate us moving through the building to unlock the gates so that we don't have to breach it, because one way or the other, the records are coming with us today.
One way or the other, the records are coming with us. Now, if you've ever wondered, if you've never dealt with an agent, whether it's federal or police coming in, that's how they are. That's how they talk. There is a process for this, but they don't sound like they're negotiating. It may be that there were not problems with the underlying warrant that would make it invalid. That's something lawyers can litigate. It may be slight amendments, which could be okay. It may also be that this whole case blows up in Donald Trump's face in the long run because there isn't a lot of precedent for digging through 6-year-old ballots from an election you lost, where the only known convictions related to that election are from the loser of the election, Donald Trump, and his team. Indeed, his lawyers were sanctioned in Georgia and elsewhere. But more clearly, what I want you to understand tonight is that video shows the power of your federal government, of armed federal agents, seizing ballots from an election settled, as I mentioned, 6 long years ago. Now, Donald Trump was the loser of that election in Georgia and, of course, the entire election that year. He lost to Joe Biden. So I say to you, as a news anchor following these stories and always trying to remain calm, what the heck are we doing 6 years later on this of all things? Because you're allowed to debate and talk about whatever you want in America. That's a great thing. You are not allowed to use, abuse, or misuse federal resources because you lost an election. Indeed, while we don't know everything, and I've been careful to state that, in the long run, this is exactly the kind of case that may, like other revenge cases, go up in smoke. But Trump is, 6 years later, directing his government to focus on this, his loss, why he was the loser in Georgia and the loser nationally, which, of course, snowballed into his efforts to join those later convicted thugs who attacked police on Jan 6, and then he pardoned them all. This is all part of that. The law breaking we know of is on his side, not the other. And he's focused on this rather than, say, fighting crime or lowering prices or any of the number of promises he vowed in his election to work on. This is what he's focused on. And quite personally, I don't say he, like his administration, and then we're kind of filling in all the gaps. No, Donald Trump, new reporting, personally involved in this, taking the step of talking to some of those agents, we saw one of them on camera, by speakerphone after the raid.
Honestly, do these game companies hate fun?
Well, actually, you should try Last War.
That's unusual. We don't believe the president would usually have all the FBI agents' numbers or place those calls. There is a chain of command, but he did it through an intelligence official and questioned them and praised them and thanked them for working on this inquiry through, as the Times puts it, this unusual call. And that may involve another violation because the National Intelligence Director, Gabbard, was on site and facilitated that call. It's not clear how her foreign intelligence authority would relate to meddling in a long-finished domestic election where her boss lost. She's also, we should note, facing a pending classified whistleblower complaint. Now, just to put this in context, efforts by the president to abuse military or intelligence powers for domestic politics, that's not allowed. That's part of what ended Nixon's presidency. And for those who are skeptical, you might say, well, in the beginning with Nixon, people said, well, I guess he's getting away with it. And he was. That's what happens when powerful people break rules. In the end, he didn't. In the end, many of his aides got in trouble. Some went to prison. Here we are at this moment with some of this stuff spilling out. And the question again being, will there be accountability or not? But Trump is more blatant than Nixon ever was about these violations. He's also making an unconstitutional public demand to try to get the feds to oversee elections in places where Republicans are losing. Now, that is also a no-go. And it's important in these times where people are trying to figure out where is the line and they're testing it. The Republican Senate leader speaking out today saying, no, the president cannot do that. For all the questions about when and how Republicans stand up, or will they just say the obvious, Senator Thune did, because this isn't even allowed. So he may be confident Trump won't do it, can't do it. There aren't the mechanisms necessarily to do it. But before I even show what Trump's saying and fact check it, I just want to give you the constitutional limits. Because the Constitution gives states the power to decide the, quote, times, places, and manner of holding elections and appointing electors for the presidential election. After the states do that, they are in the lead. Congress may alter some of the state rules, but the president cannot seize or nationalize anything. The president does have a lot of power, and we've seen that in foreign policy. If he wants to go use war powers against Venezuela in real time, we don't see anything stopping him. But the Constitution does stop him and give these other extraordinary powers to the states. And you don't need to be a constitutional scholar to follow the logic. The founders were worried about despots and kings. They were not going to give the president, who is the more unitary officer, control over the elections when they were just standing up this new thing called elections that would try to remove people from power. So they weren't kings. So it's kind of like, duh, of course the president cannot and does not oversee his own election or powers. Now I'm going to show you, as promised, Donald Trump's unlawful claim in a recent podcast with a former FBI employee that didn't last that long in this administration, with the facts in the Constitution.
The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. And we have states that are so crooked, and they're counting votes. We have states that I won that show I didn't win. Now you're going to see something in Georgia.
And on he went. The legal fact check is more important. He's talking about something he cannot do, and that Senate Leader Thune agreed today he cannot do, but he will potentially try to see how far he can go. He also lost Georgia. Fact check. The president was false in that claim. And we know that he knows because he was the one making calls, furtively trying to get extra votes. Why did he need extra votes? Because he knew he didn't have them, because he lost. The Constitution bars all of that. Donald Trump doubled down on some of those remarks today as well when asked by reporters. I'm not going to show you that because we've already fact-checked it, and that's enough in terms of our news standards. These are Donald Trump's policies. He is responsible for how his policies are turned into action. The masked menacing, the rampant escalation in violence, the clearly avoidable killings. And the agent looks back on it and says, blank happens. But it doesn't just happen. This is your government. These are your tax dollars. There is a big accountability mechanism above all others. It is obviously elections. And there are people who are concerned, understandably so, about the efforts I just detailed to try to undermine these elections. And yet, on the other hand, we do have some recent examples. Donald Trump was president when he lost the election at the end of the first term. It's the one he's still reinvestigating. And although major pressure was put in the first modern insurrection of our history, even amid all that, ultimately, he did leave office, just not peacefully. And we had elections in November, and they transpired. And now the question is, heading in this November, towards this November, why is the President of the United States testing whether he can federalize or nationalize elections? Why is he testing his powers to go seize ballots, once for the past, maybe next time for the present? It is a very real stress test of our democracy. The fact that it can be beat doesn't mean that there are losses along the way. We just showed some of the testimony from human beings hurt or killed in ways that the vast majority of law enforcement experts say were at least avoidable, if not important to investigate as potentially crimes. So that is the stakes of where we're at.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. As you know, it is already 2026. We're in the midterm election year. 9 months away from Election Day. 9 months today. And Donald Trump and members of his administration are already making moves to try to illegitimately take control of the American election system. Now, Trump doesn't want Republicans to lose the House and the Senate. One big reason in particular, I think, that he keeps making very clear.
You got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, I mean, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached.
I don't think he's wrong, and I really think he's very obsessed with legacy right now, that he does not want to go for his third impeachment. He's obsessed with keeping control of Congress. I think, honestly, primarily for that reason, because it's not like he cares about passing legislation or cares about other people's electoral fortunes. But the thing is, he's obsessed about keeping Congress, and he has no real plan to do it normally or legitimately, right? I mean, despite all the bravado and the constant boasts about never being more popular, they know the score. The administration actually understands that Trump is in trouble. The Republican Party is in trouble. And it's not just polling. Look at this. You might have seen this over the weekend. A Texas special election that happened over the weekend in which a Democrat flipped a red state Senate seat, winning by 14 points in a district Trump carried by 17 points in 2024. That's a 31-point swing. That is almost literally unheard of. Now, don't expect a blowout like that in November. You're going to have turnout that's going to be much higher. That was a low turnout election. Democrats tend to do better in those. But even a 10-point swing in the midterms would wipe out the Republican majority. Heck, a 5-point swing in the midterms would wipe out the Republican House majority. So they know what they're facing. They see the writing on the walls. And they know they don't right now, unless things change dramatically, have a path to just outright winning a free and fair election. I mean, most normal incumbents who aren't Donald Trump see their party suffer losses in the midterms, right? So Donald Trump is exploring other plans. The first plan was to gerrymander congressional maps. Why leave it up to voters to choose Republicans when Republicans could simply choose their voters? And so Donald Trump tenaciously, constantly pushed red states to redraw their districts to be even redder, right? To change their congressional districts mid-decade. This never happens, right? Texas did it. Missouri did it. Ohio still may. But Trump's pressure generated a backlash. First, among Republicans in, for instance, Indiana, who just told him to take a hike, wouldn't do what he wanted, despite J.D. Vance going there in person, inviting him to the White House, right? And also in blue states like California, which defensively redrew its maps. And so when all is said and done, between California, what's happening in Virginia, maybe Maryland, the fact that Indiana wouldn't do it, the whole thing made the gerrymandering war a wash. It could actually, in the end up net benefiting the Democrats because Donald Trump started this fight. So now midterm election year is upon us. That gerrymandering plan has really failed. I think they thought this was like their secret weapon, right? Their ace in the hole. No. So now it's time for the Republican plan B. And that is, and they're saying this out loud, to fully seize the machinery of American voting. I mean, last week they started moving on this project in Fulton County, Georgia, where FBI agents raided the election office and left with nearly 700 boxes of ballots. That's all under the watchful eye of Trump's director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Her spokeswoman told MS Now Trump has ordered Gabbard to investigate election security nationwide, even though she has no domestic law enforcement powers, and even though after the 1970s, we have a bunch of laws and regulations to separate domestic law enforcement from international intelligence. That's actually really important. Now, former officials say that this is preposterous, and they also fear it's part of a plan to attempt to steal the midterms. Remember, Fulton County in Georgia, right, which contains Atlanta, was ground zero for Trump's 2020 election lies. Those were lies pushed by people like, for instance, former Trump aide Roger Stone, who posted a photo of himself with J.D. Vance just yesterday. Stone said they chatted, but didn't say what they chatted about. Also lies pushed by former Trump lawyer Sidney Powell, remember her, who was seen just after the Georgia raid last week with Trump DOJ official Ed Martin. And remember, it was Powell, along with disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and the former CEO of Overstock.com, Patrick Byrne, remember that guy, who all marched into the Oval Office in December 2020 and told Trump to seize voting machines and declare victory. Well, late last month, the former Overstock guy, Patrick Byrne, reportedly accepted an invitation to the White House. And over the weekend, guess what? He praised the Fulton County raid. Now, you might be asking yourself, I particularly asked myself this when I saw Roger Stone post that photo of J.D. Vance. Why are all the usual suspects from the 2020 attempted coup back in Trump's orbit now? Maybe to give it another run, to try to rig future elections in the name of the 2020 election. I mean, just yesterday, Donald Trump was complaining about winning more states in 2020 on the podcast of his former FBI number 2, Dan Bongino. Dan Bongino, who hated his job, apparently actually doing like government work and now wants to go back to podcasting. Trump adding, quote, "We should take over the voting in 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting." Now, that, of course, is illegal. It's a violation of all sorts of state federal statutes and constitutional principles of federalism. But today, of course, Trump just doubled down.
What exactly did you mean when you said that you should nationalize elections, and which 15 states are you talking about?
I want to see elections be honest, and if a state can't run an election, I think the people behind me should do something about it. Because, you know, if you think about it, a state is an agent for the federal government in elections. I don't know why the federal government doesn't do them anyway. But when you see some of these states about how horribly they run their elections, what a disgrace it is, I think the federal government, when you see crooked elections, and we had plenty of them, and by the way, we had them last time, but go to 2020 and look at the facts that are coming out. Rigged, crooked elections. If we have areas, take a look at Detroit, take a look at Pennsylvania, take a look at Philadelphia. You go take a look at Atlanta. Look at some of the places that horrible corruption on elections. And the federal government should not allow that. The federal government should get involved. These are agents of the federal government to count the votes. If they can't count the votes legally and honestly, then somebody else should take over.
Now, keep in mind, I mean, these are all lies, right? And this is a guy who has said he thinks he won California multiple times. I mean, it's like meeting someone and them telling you, like, they can fly like Superman. Or me just, like, telling you, like, oh, yeah, I'm 7 feet 4 inches. Like, what do you do with that? That's a person who is, I don't know, diagnosable in some way, something, right? This is the guy who told Georgia's election supervisor to find him 11,000 votes. He's worried about the states counting their votes. You can see why, right? Because they counted them accurately. So last week, Republicans unveiled a Make Elections Great Again bill to put new limits on voting by mail and voter registration drives, as well as mandate voter ID issued by the federal government, as well as new voter surveillance programs. Who's going to stop it? Well, definitely not the Speaker of the House, a guy who voted against certifying the 2020 election, who is an election denier, and got back to his election truther roots on Capitol Hill today.
We know it's in our system. The states have been in charge of administering their elections. What you're hearing from the president is his frustration about the lack of some of the blue states, frankly, of enforcing these things and making sure that they are free and fair elections. We had 3 House Republican candidates who were ahead on Election Day in the last election cycle. And every time a new tranche of ballots came in, they just magically whittled away until their leads were lost. It looks on its face to be fraudulent. Can I prove that? No, because it happened so far upstream.
Okay. I mean, the reason they lost was because the votes came in that had more Democrats voting for the person. But they don't like that, right? I mean, that's the key thing, right? Mike Johnson, Donald Trump, all of them together agree on this point. They don't want people to choose who gets to win elections. They want to say who wins elections so that they never have to lose an election. And the entire definition of a democracy is a system in which the ruling party can lose an election. That's it. That's the one-sentence democracy. They don't like it. And remember, in addition to all this, masked armed federal agents are disappearing people off the streets in multiple cities. They're terrorizing people into staying homes. They are shooting law-abiding observers, killing them in some cases, while the administration tells states like Minnesota and Pennsylvania they'll call off the dogs if those blue states hand over their most private, granular voting data. Pam Bondi gave away the game here, right? Those masked agents running amok in your city who killed 2 of your citizens, who account for 66% of the homicides in the city of Minneapolis, yeah, maybe we can tell them to leave if you give us the voting data. So again, connect the dots here. They're not exactly like, using excessive subterfuge. All of their eggs are now in this basket. The gerrymandering didn't work. They just got their butts kicked in a plus 14 Trump district. Donald Trump and his allies are not planning on getting more popular before November. They are now hell-bent on going farther than they could in 2020.
On Saturday in the state of Texas, a Democrat, local union leader, and first-time political candidate Taylor Remmett won a special election for Texas state legislature, defeating his Republican opponent by 14 points. In a district, Trump won by 17 points just over a year ago. That is a 31-point swing toward Democrats in just 14 months. And then there's even more numbers. There's, of course, the polling. It's really hard, really, really hard, I can promise you, to win in a swing district when the leader of your party has an approval rating in the 30s. It just is. And look at that. That's a couple of polls there on your screen. That's his approval rating. And all of that and more was probably on Trump's mind yesterday when he decided to catch up with a disgruntled former employee, the podcaster turned deputy FBI director turned podcaster again, Dan Bongino. And Trump sat down for an interview with Bongino, or the Podfather, as Bongino calls himself. And in the middle of a discussion about crime and immigration, Trump suddenly said this.
The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting.
Okay, so you could probably hear that pretty well. We put it on the screen just in case, but that is Donald Trump saying he wants Republicans to take over and nationalize voting in at least 15 places. And it certainly would not be just 15 places if he were to do this. Now, while the federal government is allowed to make general laws about voting, the Constitution specifically gives the states control over elections. So having the federal government, and I would note the Trump-controlled federal government, take control of elections would be a wild anti-democratic power grab. And it's not like it was a slip of the tongue where he just said it once off the cuff. I mean, he kept talking about it.
What exactly did you mean when you said that you should nationalize elections, and which 15 states are you talking about?
I want to see elections be honest, and if a state can't run an election, I think the people behind me should do something about it. Because, if you think about it, a state is an agent for the federal government in elections. I don't know why the federal government doesn't do them anyway. Go to 2020 and look at the facts that are coming out. Rigged, crooked elections. If we have areas, take a look at Detroit, take a look at Pennsylvania, take a look at Philadelphia. You go take a look at Atlanta. Look at some of the places that horrible corruption on elections. And the federal government should not allow that. The federal government should get involved.
A state is an agent for the federal government in elections? Okay. Now, we all know Trump didn't like the outcome in 2020, and he wants the federal government to take over the elections in predominantly Democratic cities. Those are the ones he mentioned, because the federal government he runs, in his mind, will make sure it works out the way he wants. And yes, the truth is Trump has been fixated on this issue for a very long time. But what is different now is that Trump has, well, a whole lot of lackeys in his administration who want to please daddy and are willing to follow through on his election takeover plans. I mean, last week we saw these extraordinary images of Trump's director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, looking on, lurking, I will say, creepily, as FBI agents seized boxes and boxes of 2020 ballots from officials in Fulton County, Georgia. And today, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution published body camera footage from the local police officers on the scene during that raid. And it shows just how completely chaotic and haphazard that search really was.
So did anybody get a physical copy of the search warrant? No. When did they get here? About 12:30. Just unannounced?
Unannounced. What's happening now is that their warrant is wrong. It had the wrong, it's not in elections possession, it's in clerk's possession, so it had the wrong department.
So on our end, nobody received a copy of?
The attorneys asked them for it, they finally gave them a copy. Then the attorney's like, it's wrong, so they're allegedly waiting for the judge to update it.
So, I mean, that's some of it. You could confuse police and confuse local officials, agents demanding access despite having the wrong warrant for the wrong facility. All while the director of national intelligence, who was supposed to have no role in domestic law enforcement, was just standing by, lurking in her cap. Now, in the days after that raid, Trump's DOJ initially tried to pretend like there was nothing weird at all about Trump's director of national intelligence showing up in person at an FBI raid. I mean, on Friday, when Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche was asked about Tulsi Gabbard's presence, a perfectly reasonable question we all wanted the answer to, he acted like it was a crazy thing for a reporter to ask.
Could you please explain Tulsi Gabbard's role in DOJ activity regarding the Fulton County search?
What do you mean her role?
It was reported that
She happened to be present in Atlanta. I mean, yes, I saw the same photos you did. I mean, she doesn't work for the Department of Justice or the FBI.
What do you mean her role? Yeah, we all were wondering why the director of national intelligence was there. According to him, she just happened to be there. She was in the neighborhood, thought she'd pop by and take in a nice FBI raid or something like that. I mean, that was obviously not true. And this week, Gabbard herself confirmed it, writing in a letter to Democrats on the House and Senate Intelligence Committees that, quote, my presence was requested by the president. There you go, Todd Blanche. And that's consistent, of course, with the Wall Street Journal's reporting that Gabbard has been assigned a new role, studying information about voting machines, analyzing data from swing states, and pursuing theories that President Trump has promoted to claim the 2020 election was unfairly taken from him. Then there was also Todd Blanche's attempt on Sunday to downplay Trump's role in the seizure of Georgia ballots.
The president told reporters, quote, they got into the votes. You're going to see some interesting things happening. What interesting things is he talking about, and why was he so involved in an FBI and DOJ raid?
Well, just because he said that doesn't mean that he's involved. I don't believe he was involved.
I don't know what happened there. I think he may have gone cross-eyed for a second when Dana asked him a very reasonable question. Well, his answer also turned out to be false. We have since learned that the president was not only involved in the raid, but in an extraordinary and unusual turn of events, he was actually in touch with Tulsi Gabbard and spoke to the FBI agents who conducted the search via speakerphone, all according to the New York Times. The president of the United States is not supposed to be in direct communication with FBI agents about their investigations, which are supposed to be independent of political influence. But none of that seems to have bothered FBI Director Kash Patel, who thought the whole thing was awesome, super rad.
To hear from the commander-in-chief for my troops on the ground there was a pretty cool thing, and we were pleased to hear the president come in and say thank you for what you're doing. That is maybe unusual from prior administrations, but I take it every chance I get.
Pretty cool the way the president just broke with decades of FBI protocol there, Kash Patel. Pretty cool. He's the commander-in-chief in there. Wait, what did Patel call him? His troops on the ground? And this isn't just a run-of-the-mill investigation. They were seizing voting data about an election Trump claims he won so that he can justify putting in place more restrictive voting measures in advance of the midterms. That's what's happening here. Now, in a normal world, that would be something that congressional leaders of both parties would push back on. And I will give Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune just a teeny bit of credit here. Today, he said that he is, quote, not in favor of federalizing elections, okay? Though he also attempts to explain away Trump's comments, saying the president was just talking about restrictive voter ID legislation, which is bad enough, but the president was not talking about that. Yet there's still much more pushback from the Senate Majority Leader, than we got from little Mike Johnson, who decided to just embrace Trump's election conspiracies with open arms. He is going to get a special White House cookie for this one.
What you're hearing from the president is his frustration about the lack of some of the blue states, frankly, of enforcing these things and making sure that they are free and fair elections. We had 3 House Republican candidates who were ahead on Election Day in the last election cycle. And every time a new tranche of ballots came in, they just magically whittled away until their leads were lost. It looks on its face to be fraudulent. Can I prove that? No, because it happened so far upstream.
That conspiracy theorist just happens to be second in line to the presidency. And as crazy as his comments were today, they're also not particularly surprising from him, because after all, it was Congressman Mike Johnson who played a key role trying to help Trump overturn the election in 2020 by organizing a lawsuit on Trump's behalf. And that's sort of the point here. Trump is now surrounded by people who will indulge his worst impulses on this. I mean, his director of national intelligence has been tasked with proving claims of foreign interference. His DOJ has seized ballots from a key county in Georgia, and Trump's already talking about nationalizing elections. The thing is, we already know what this might look like because we saw him contemplate a version of this playbook back in 2020. After losing that election, Trump wanted to use the U.S. military to seize voting machines and all other voting records from the states. In fact, there was a draft executive order directing the Pentagon to do just that. It ordered the Secretary of Defense to seize, collect, retain, and analyze all machines, equipment, electronically stored information, and material relating to the 2020 election. Now, the basis for that order, unsurprisingly, was a proverbial grab bag of conspiracy theories, all alleging international and foreign interference in the 2020 election. And in an echo of what we're seeing today, the director of national intelligence would have had a key role in overseeing the findings from that operation. Thankfully, that executive order was never issued. Trump was essentially talked out of the whole idea. But just last month, he told the New York Times that he regretted it. I should have done it, he said. And now it appears he's got a second chance to try to use that playbook.
After what we have seen in Minneapolis, even if you support the president's broad immigration mission, do you approve of the tactics they're using? And have they been honest with you about what's happening on the ground?
You know, I think the best way to police a city is with police from the city. I think it's very difficult for federal agents to do the job of local policemen. And I'm not saying it's easy for local police. They've got to distinguish between what is First Amendment protected activity. They have to understand they don't go through doors without having a judicial warrant to go in someone's house uninvited. So all of these things the local police are used to dealing with. And so my preference is that, yes, the local police be doing this and not ICE. On the other side of the equation is the local police supposedly have said they will not enforce federal immigration law. So you have some of the folks, including the mayor, saying we're going to nullify federal law and we're not going to help you. So I think there's some blame to go around. I don't like what's been happening. I've been very vocal to say that in the death of Alexander Preddy, that he did not appear to be assaulting anyone, despite what DHS said. He appeared to be retreating at every turn. Even the shoving of the woman to the pavement, I think, is unacceptable. It wasn't a loss of life, but if I were the police chief in a local community in my town where I live in Kentucky, and I saw a policeman pushing a woman to the ground that violently, I would have his badge, because that's unacceptable behavior. The shooting, without question, was something that is a terrible, terrible tragedy. And I think you have to have an independent investigation. I think people have lost trust in the Department of Homeland Security, and my suggestion is they should have an independent police commission that's used to looking at use of force, and that this be reviewed. And that will be part of what I do in the hearing. I've got it coming up, is asking what is and what is not acceptable behavior.
Then do you blame the mayor for the position that he's taken? Because he's aligned with what the police chief is doing. What he's not aligned with is what ICE is doing, and he can't control ICE.
Yeah, I think there's, like most controversies, there's blame on both sides. I don't like the tactics of what ICE has done. I think they've been excessive, and I think that the city is in an uproar. There's chaos. And so I don't like what they've done. But if you ask ICE, why are you there with 3,000 agents, they'll say, because when we call the local police to help apprehend someone, the local police won't come. Now, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Part of my panel is going to be the government witnesses, but I'm also inviting people from Minnesota, and I want to know, are they refusing to help apprehend criminals that they're asked to apprehend? That would be a sanctuary city where you refuse or you choose to nullify federal law. If that's true, they are partly to blame for the situation they've gotten. Even if that is true, though, there still have to be rules for the use of force, and we're going to ask those questions. You know, they're saying they were assaulted by someone holding a camera. If holding a camera and filming is assault, I've got a real problem with that being the conclusion. So we're going to have to figure out what is and what is not acceptable for the use of force, but also we're going to have to figure out why are the local people not helping to apprehend people who are wanted by the law.
Then you say, well, and to be clear, neither Alex Preddy nor Renee Good were wanted by the law, but you say you want an independent investigation. So are you unsatisfied with how this administration is investigating or not investigating the deaths of these two Americans?
I think the main thing is, if you want trust to develop again, I'm not somebody who wants to abolish ICE. I want ICE to behave within the rules and enforce the law, but I want them to behave in a normal, rational law enforcement manner. But I also want people to trust the investigation. And I think when the DHS officials come out and say, well, obviously he was assaulting, you know, kind of like he got what he deserved. He was assaulting the officers, or he was brandishing a weapon, or he's a potential, or he is a would-be assassin. All these things aren't supported by facts. And so if the people saying this are going to be in charge of the investigation, I think it's going to be hard to restore trust. I think Homan actually has helped the situation by going to Minneapolis and saying, we're not going to patrol the streets.
Do you think it's okay for ICE to be wearing these masks?
I think that anonymity and wearing a mask leads to less responsible behavior. I'm not saying there might not be a value on the border where the cartels are running large and things are a little bit more murky and mayors' heads are being chopped off by the cartel. I have a little more sympathy there. the images where I've seen ICE agents in masks in an elevator in a courthouse in Chicago, I think are inappropriate. Look, the local police in Chicago, the bailiff, everybody else is unmasked. I don't know why we would have one group of men apprehending. The image I saw was of arresting women and their children in an elevator in the courthouse in Chicago. I think, one, that reduces trust by the public, but doesn't seem appropriate. And I do think when you're anonymous, like anytime you're anonymous, you tend to do things that you might not do if you were recognized.
Many voters are turned off by what they're seeing on immigration enforcement. How worried are you about the effect this will have on the GOP come the midterms?
You know, I guess I don't think about the elections. What I think about is we have a problem. And for example, if someone has raped someone in our country and they're sitting in jail and they're getting ready to get out, we need the local people to cooperate with the federal people. And I want that person gone from our country.
Senator, no one's talking about rapists. No one's talking about rapists.
Well,
We're talking about 5-year-old boys. Well, that's not what I'm. But when you talk about what the American people are unhappy with,
I know. I know, but one side is talking about a 5-year-old cute boy that looks terrible that he and his father are being detained. But there are also people who are committing crimes that the ICE agents are asking for the Minneapolis police to help, and they're not receiving help. We need to get to the bottom of whether that's true or not true. If it isn't a problem and all the hardcore criminals the local officials are cooperating, they're being deported, I'm perfectly willing to accept and hear that, but I'm not positive that's the truth. I think that there are people who have committed crimes in our country who do need to be deported when their term is finished.
Sure, and there's a lot more undocumented immigrants in places like Florida and Texas, not in Minnesota. Let's turn and talk about the economy, because the president regularly.
And I think the difference is, I think the difference is, though, in Florida and Texas, they're cooperating. The local officials are cooperating. Look, in my town in Kentucky, what happens? I have 2 policemen that work for me that are retired. If the FBI calls them, it's 10 local police go with 2 FBI agents to make an arrest, or an ATF agent or a DEA agent. It's always been that way. So where there is cooperation, there's not a problem. So cooperation is part of the problem in Minneapolis.
Sure.
We can't ignore that.
I want to move on, but also out of respect for time, but also we are not seeing droves of ICE agents go to Kentucky or Florida or Texas. But let's talk about the economy. The president regularly dismisses voters' concerns about affordability. Biden and Democrats got punished in 2024 for not tackling the issue. I would say that the president and Republicans are not doing better when it comes to addressing affordability. What's your take?
When prices rise, people have this new word, affordability, but I think it's essentially that your prices are rising faster than your wages are. That's inflation, and we know what causes inflation. Inflation is caused by an increase in the money supply. The money supply is increased because the Federal Reserve monetizes the debt. So we run about a $2 trillion deficit a year. As we monetize that, new money enters the circulation. That causes inflation. So inflation is cumulative. So throughout the Biden years, we had about 20% inflation over about 4 years. It's come down, but we're still adding to it. So if you're looking at 5 years, 1 year of Trump and 4 years of Biden, prices are up about 25%. And your wages are not up as rapidly. So the problem that Trump has is, even though inflation has slowed down, inflation is additive. Prices are still going up. People are still being squeezed by the previous 4 years of inflation as well. But if people want to fix it, we fix it by balancing the budget and having government spend what comes in.
Do you see any of that happening?
No, I think both parties are terrible. I tried to cut $5 billion last week.
Democrats are not in power,
and
so
every
Republicans
Democrat
are.
voted against it. I know. I tried to cut $5 billion last week. Every Democrat voted against it, and half the Republicans. So it is a bipartisan problem, but I am one trying to reduce the deficit by spending less money, and I can tell you that's a minority position, and the debt is the fault of both parties spending money we don't have, and that leads to inflation, which leads to the affordability problem.
What are your thoughts on the administration now talking about nationalizing elections?
Yeah, that's not what the Constitution says about elections. There is some dispute, and has gone to the Supreme Court, about whether federal elections are different than state elections. And the Supreme Court did rule that, for example, Washington State can't set term limits on federal officials if Georgia doesn't. It has to be uniform election law. But as far as the time, place, and manner of the elections, that under the Constitution is a state activity. So I'm not for nationalizing it. I was against Nancy Pelosi's bill, which would have nationalized it, but I would also be against any bill coming from this this administration that would nationalize elections.
Sir, I have two more quick ones for you. I just want to talk internationally. The president seems to be following this interventionist playbook, seizing Maduro in Venezuela, threatening action in Iran, a blockade of Cuba, but he's also threatening some of our strongest allies. He calls it America first. Do you think he's making America weaker?
Yeah, I think we're overextended as far as the debt of our country. A couple of years ago, it was Admiral Mullen who said, the biggest threat to our national security is actually our debt. So I think even though they've had most of these interventions they say are short-lived, they're also still expensive, and there is a potential that what they think is short-lived becomes long. I think when we went into Afghanistan, we never thought we'd be there for 20 some odd years. I hope that's not what happens in Venezuela. But I also think it's very important that the people debate this through Congress. Our founding fathers said the power to go to war, initiate or declare war, was a congressional power, not an executive power.
And, sir, just one more America First question for you. The Wall Street Journal reported over the weekend that Abu Dhabi royalty signed a deal with the Trump family to purchase a stake in their crypto venture 4 days before the inauguration for $500 million. And while this deal was sort of taking shape, the UAE was in the process of securing its own deal with the Trump administration to acquire AI chips, despite the fact that the chips could be passed on to China, a national security risk. Do you think this should be investigated?
It worries me, and I think all of these different sovereign funds investing in people in or related to the administration do worry me, and we're going to see where it leads. But we're starting to look at it. We're going to look at it and see where it leads.
All right, then. Senator Paul, thank you for joining me tonight. The midterm elections are exactly 9 months from today, November 3rd. But even at this very moment, the future of our elections feels like an urgent issue. Here's what President Donald Trump says about our American elections.
The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting.
Today, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked about those very comments. Here's what she had to say.
The president believes in the United States Constitution. However, he believes there has obviously been a lot of fraud and irregularities that have taken place in American elections. And again, voter ID is a highly popular and common sense policy that the president wants to pursue, and he wants to pass legislation to make that happen for all states across the country.
That right there, a top White House official saying, quote, the president believes in the Constitution, then adding the word however. In a case this White House needs a reminder, let us take a look at Article 1, Section 4. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. By the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. This all comes just days after Trump's FBI seized 2020 election ballots from Fulton County, Georgia. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution obtained local police body camera of that very search, and here's a bit of it.
This is all in regards to election side stuff.
Where where we're here, right? So I can't discuss more than more than that. But as long as we keep, the big thing is just trying to keep media. Someone let media in here and keep media clear out of here.
What's happening now is that their warrant is wrong. It had the wrong. It's not in elections possession. It's in clerk's possession.
The warrant will be amended slightly, but for all intents and purposes, what they had is what it's going to look like. We wanted to let her facilitate us moving through the building to unlock the gates so that we don't have to breach it, because one way or the other, the records are coming with us today.
Meanwhile, the DOJ's document dump from the Epstein files is having massive ripple effects. Tomorrow, a federal judge was supposed to consider shutting down the department's Epstein files website because of the victims' names that were disclosed. But this evening, that hearing was canceled at the request of the victims' lawyers after the department assured the survivors in the court case that it will work to quickly correct these problems in a manner that protects them from further harm. Well, today, Bill and Hillary Clinton finalized their deals to give closed-door testimony to the House Oversight Committee about Epstein. This will happen at the end of the month. The Clintons cut that deal to avoid possible contempt charges for defying a subpoena. Now Democrats are pointing out that this sets a precedent for issuing subpoenas for former presidents and their family members to testify. Get ready, boys and girls. Democratic Congressman Maxwell Frost said the following: "It does set a precedent, and we will follow it. Donald Trump, all of his kids, everybody," end quote. Of course, for that to happen, Democrats would have to take back control of the House or the Senate, which brings us back to where we started this evening, the importance of the future of our elections. It's time to get smarter. With help of our leadoff panel, Jeff Mason joins us. Washington correspondent and new senior member of the White House and politics team at Bloomberg News. Leanne Caldwell, chief Washington correspondent for Puck, and James Sample, law professor at Hofstra University and former attorney at the Brennan Center for Justice's Democracy Program. All right, James, this is your bread and butter. What is your reaction to what the president is saying and some of the specific changes he wants to see with our elections? Because if you just say in passing, sure, voter ID, people should have to, show their license. A lot of people would say that's common sense. You have to do that to buy cigarettes or beer.
So when the executive says, let's nationalize the elections, and he goes even a step further and says, let's nationalize the elections and let's have Republicans, a party, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, when you start talking about having a particular party take control of elections, you are not talking about election integrity. So you can talk voter ID all the livelong day. You're not talking about election integrity. You're actually talking about, and you quoted the exact provision, Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution. You're talking about going contra to the Constitution. And so when your press secretary stands there and says, and has to reassure America that the President of the United States believes in the Constitution.
Positive vibes. Download
it. This system I really trafficking me. Brother man, we've been a try, we've been a fight every day, we've never surrendered. Them here with Christ, and them don't care if we die. You see them agenda, God protect me lives. See man, them not afraid for Christ, and them felt to guide them. They know the only we reside. Only for why no beside, but the world is their problem. We've been a try, we've been a fight every day, never surrender. Them here with Christ, and them don't care if we die. You see them agenda, Lord protect me lives. See man, them not afraid for Christ, and them felt to guide them. They know the only we reside. Only for why no beside, but the world is their problem.
Thank you. Oh, it's gonna blow. You are amazing. People love your song. This is not the first time this happened to me. Last time I played it, they was like, who is this? Like, you're awesome. You're gonna make it. You're a star. You are a star, okay? You're a star, okay?
Them here with Christ, and them don't care if we die. You see them agenda, Lord protect me lives. See man, them not afraid for Christ, and them felt to guide them. They know the only we reside. Only for why no beside, but the world is their problem. Father God, keep your eyes for me life and me kids. Only you can hear me Christ, and you never deceive. We not perfect as human beings, we can be weakness. We always try to keep it clean and avoid the sickness. I true say many of them not real, but it's not the business. Fight is not the way to see it, man, we have it in less. So many you leave them on my yard, but them never come back. The family hope here, postcard, but them never get that. This is some plan we used to own, we go and sell it to them. The places that we used to farm them and the first wicked. Uncle Sam back them cause he make him profit. And every time we try to stand up, take a head and we see. Grammar violence, one we street, but we still a resist. Only for man of God and preach, try to still a persist. Hey, Father God, only you can save me. Hey, the system I really try to kill me. Hey, we've been a try, we've been a fight every day, we never surrender. Them here with Christ, but them don't care if we die. We see them agenda, Lord protect me lives. See man, them not afraid for Christ, and them felt to guide them. They know the only we reside. Only for why no beside, but the world is their problem. Been a try, been a fight every day, never surrender. Them here with Christ, but them don't care if we die. We see them agenda, Lord protect me lives. See man, them not afraid for Christ, and them will to guide them. They know the only we reside. Only for why no beside, but the world is their problem.
He's awesome, guys. Go download his song. I think he's so cool. Okay?